Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So this week, I got a request from someone that basically said, I'm relatively new to Modern, and I really like all the cool, unique decks you show off in Instant Deck Techs, but I want to know what some of the tier decks do. I want to know how the decks that I will face when I go to my F&M, when I go to a GP or SCG Open. How do those decks work? The decks that I'm going to play against again and again and again. And one of the challenges of doing instant deck techs is finding enough cool decks to make a deck tech every day. So we're going to start mixing in some tier decks, kind of the tier deck series, for people that maybe don't know how these decks work. I forget that not everyone has played Magic as long as I have and knows the decks as well as I do. So I'm sure there's people out there who can benefit from a breakdown of tier decks. So we're starting this part of the series with an instant deck tech for Bogles in Modern, one of my most hated decks in Modern, just a little step below, in fact. This version recently took Anist 1997 to a 5-0 finish in a Magic Online League, so congrats to Anist on their finish with the deck. A quick reminder before we break it all down, if you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, please know, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So Bogles is named after and built around Slippery Boggle, a 1/1 for 1 with hexproof, and that's kind of the idea of the deck. The deck plays a bunch of really inexpensive creatures and relatively underpowered creatures that have hexproof. So Slippery Boggle, Glade Cover Scout, essentially the same card, 1/1s for 1 with hexproof. Solana Ledgewalker is a 1/1 for 2 with hexproof, but it can only be blocked by creatures with flying, so you get a little bit of evasion built in. So the idea of this deck is you play these creatures on the first turn of the game, and one of the challenges of the deck is you only have 9 Bogles, which leads to a lot of mulliganing, because you really need a creature in your opening hand if you decide to play Bogles. So if you play with Bogles, you want to mulligan until you find one of these creatures most of the time, and if you play against Bogles, you'll see people tend to mulligan a lot with the deck, and that's because they're looking for a Boggle, because you really need a Boggle on turn 1. That's your entire plan. So you play your hexproof creature, and then you start loading it up with enchantment. So that's the idea of the deck. Play your Boggle on turn 1, Spider Umbra and Hyena Umbra. Give a little bit of a bonus, +1/+1 in first strike, or +1/+1 in reach. But the big deal with these are they have totem armor, which means if the enchanted creature is destroyed, instead you destroy the aura. So the Spider Umbra, the Hyena Umbra. So one of the ways that Bogles can lose is Wrath of God, Supreme Verdict, Wrath effects. Because with hexproof, you can't use targeted removal. So Wrath effects are one of the main outs that decks have to beating hexproof creatures loaded up with enchantments. Using totem armors takes that out off the table. So your opponent can't just Supreme Verdict you and ruin the game. Instead, they Supreme Verdict, you lose a Spider Umbra and keep killing your opponent. Then we have some enchantments that really pump up the creatures. Ethereal Armor gives +1/+1 in first strike, but it gives +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. So it's often giving +5/+5, +4/+4, and first strike makes it really hard to tangle with in combat. Glaring Aegeus also kind of works in a similar way, making it really hard to interact with your creatures in combat because you can tap down a creature whenever the enchanted creature attacks. And then we have some kind of finishing type enchantments. Rancor and Unflinching Courage give your creature trample, which means your opponent just can't play Lingering Souls and chump block forever. Unflinching Courage also gives lifelink, which is one of the key aspects of this deck. The deck is fairly fast, but it's not as fast as the fastest decks in Modern. Like a burn deck can outrace Bogles, unless you have an Unflinching Courage or a Daybreak Coronet, another one of the key cards, which gives your Boggle lifelink. So every time you're attacking, you're gaining 5 life, 10 life, just these huge chunks of life, which means you easily outrace any of the other aggressive decks in the format. And then the deck does have kind of a weird backup plan for creatures. I mentioned that not having a Boggle is a problem. Well, sometimes when things go wrong, you can use your Windswept Teeth to fetch up a Dryad Arbor, which is a land and a creature, and go all in with your enchantments on the Dryad Arbor. Of course, this is like your plan Z because Dryad Arbor doesn't have hexproof, so Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, all that stuff will blow out that plan when none of those removal spells work against your Bogles because of hexproof. And then Core Spirit Dancer gives the deck a way to generate card advantage. So you play this on turn 2, every Umbra you cast, every Unflinching Courage and Rancor, you're drawing a card, and you can also put things on your Spirit Dancer. If your opponent's playing a Path to Exile deck or an Abrupt Decay deck, you probably don't want to go in on that because it's pretty easy for your opponent to kill it. On the other hand, if their removal is Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix, then it's pretty safe to just make your Spirit Dancer huge and win that way. The rest of the main deck, Path to Exiles for removal, Suppression Field is an enchantment, so it pumps up some of your other abilities, triggers some of your other cards, plus it slows down the opponent a little bit, makes it expensive to crack fetch lands, for example, to activate planeswalkers. The rest of the mana base, Brushland, Razorverge Thicket, Temple Garden, just some green-white dual lands, and then some basic lands. In the sideboard, Leyline of Sanctity is key because it keeps you from getting hit by discard. So we've talked several times about how you got to have that Boggle. If you're on the draw and your opponent goes first, they can just Thoughtseize, take your one Boggle, and then your hand does nothing. In those matchups, Leyline of Sanctity comes in, hopefully comes down on turn 0 and protects your Boggle from that discard. Also stops burn spells to the face and stuff like that. A bunch more removal, Path Dismember, Marrow Shards, and then a bunch more enchantments. Spirit Link, another racing card, another way to give your creature a pseudo lifelink, Rest in Peace for Dredge, Stony Silence, and Seal of Primordium for affinity, and then an Ethersworn Canonist to fight against combo decks, big turn storm decks, things like that. And that is Bogles for Modern, and that's been our Instant Deck Tech for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.